The lecture today is on John Stuart Mill, a British philosopher, on utilitarianism. This work was published in 1861, and he's a 19th century philosopher. He was born in London in 1806, and already at the age of 3, he studied Greek, and then he studied logic and a number of languages. And he was a very brilliant young kid, but by the age of 20, he had a nervous breakdown. So I think that you should take it easy and just go through the tempo of normal growth and education. We have last time, when we studied Kant, we looked at the two moral approaches that philosophers adopt. One is deontological, which means intuitive. It means I, from within, can assess whether an act is a moral act or not, as Kant did with the categorical imperatives and the sense of duty, of obligation. Whereas the other one is teleological, which means that it's inductive. It's based on the experience, on the results that leads, or teleological in certain aspects. Kant represents the intuitive school, and Mill represents the inductive or the empirical approach. Mill criticized the categorical imperative of Kant, and he said that not all actions are prompted by the sense of duty and obligation, and 99% of our actions are sometimes for other reasons, could be of interest, of satisfaction, of happiness, and so forth. So we will go through this throughout the readings. He wrote numerous books, but John Stuart Mill is best known for his Utilitarianism, which is the text we are reading, and we'll talk more about it now. Another text on liberty, 1859, and one of the most brilliant works that a man has written on women's issues is on the subjection of women. He even before Simone de Beauvoir raised these issues about women's rights, and he said, why is it that women have never written anything until now? And probably because they were doing all the chores while we men were sitting and writing, and sometimes we were getting inspired from them, and we were writing all our works in our names. Now, utilitarianism is the principle of the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, for the greatest amount of time, with the highest quality, in a nutshell. Now, if we look a little bit into our readings that we started from the very beginning of intercultural studies, if we start with the Epic of Gilgamesh, you remember there was that famous Siduri who, while Gilgamesh was going on his way searching for immortality, she stopped him on the way and she said, Gilgamesh, where are you going? You will never find the life for which you are looking. When the gods created man, they allotted to him death, but life they kept in their own keeping. But Siduri also said, you know, fill your belly with good things, embrace your wife, hold your child's hand, and be merry and dance, for that too is the lot of man. In other words, this life also has its merit, and enjoy it. So this was a hedonistic or a happiness principle that was 3,000 years BC. When we came to Aristotle, we read a whole text on the Nicomachean Ethics, which said how to be happy, and happiness could have been acquired in either intellectual way. We can read about happiness. It doesn't necessarily make us happy, but we will read about what makes happy, the causes and the values of happiness. And also the practical part. For Aristotle, there was the praxis. You remember he talked about the avoid excess, avoid deficiency, take the middle course. This was one of the sonum bonum, or the ultimate good that Aristotle talked about. At the end of IS 203, we came to another philosophy called the Epicureanism, which was also given to us through Lucretius. And we learned there about the concept of carpe diem, live every day as if it's the last day of your life, pick the day like a flower, enjoy avoid pain, cultivate happiness, avoid society, cultivate friends. This was another kind of, if you want to, an early flower power much before the hippies of the 60s. Of course, in most of religions that we encountered, especially the Abrahamic religions, the concept of happiness, the ultimate happiness, was to be with God. If you remember Al-Ghazali, he said ultimate happiness is to be in contact with God, how to reach God. Dante's ultimate happiness was in paradise. In Islam, the ultimate happiness of the companions of the right and the outstrippers is in paradise. So this was another view of happiness. One of the great influences that Mill was subjected to was by Jeremy Bentham. And Bentham's concept of happiness had a lot to do with the view that John Stuart Mill adopted. In fact, it was a bit like, at every day or every moment in your life, you make a balance sheet of your moments of true happiness and moments of suffering, and then you say, if I had more days of good moments and pleasures, then it is a happy encounter, happy moments, and therefore, like debit and credit, you just count moments of happiness versus moments of suffering. We remember when we read Sophocles with Antigone and Oedipus, Sophocles said, "Call no man happy until he dies." So happiness was measured at the very last moment of your life to see whether you have really been a happy person or not. So what is utilitarianism? The theory of utility or utilitarianism is understood, and I'm going to read the quotation. It is commonly understood as being a hypothesis that assesses and promotes moral actions on the basis of their outcome upon the maxim, the greatest happiness for the greatest number. So an act is considered as morally good if it gives happiness to a large number of people, whereas it is considered as evil or less good if it doesn't take into account the largest number of people. And this has been a method adopted very much in today's statistics and polls, the way that people go around and do these polls, and they tell you, so many people have advocated this, therefore it's good. So many people have said that this restaurant has good food, so you have to go and give it 1 star or 2 stars or 3 stars. Therefore, actions are right in proportion to how much they promote happiness, and they are wrong in how much they promote the reverse of happiness. Happiness is pleasure and absence of pain, and unhappiness is pain and the privation of pleasure. Now, of course, this is going to lead to a number of questions, and mainly, are we happy? I can be happy like my cat and sit all day long in the sun, or you can be happy like a cabbage if you get your water. And so, what is happiness, and what are these pleasure of moments? And here, maybe there's a bit of Aristotle also in John Stuart Mill when he tells us that happiness should not be at the level of the vegetative soul, nor at the animal soul, but rather at the level of the rational soul. So here, happiness is of the higher pleasures. It's not just the animal pleasures, the instinctive pleasures, but rather the higher form of pleasures that are of maybe a good book, or maybe a good concert, or a good beautiful painting will create great happiness for us than simply a good meal, And then he comes with this very famous sentence, which is, "It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied." So here he's putting a level of happinesses that can be acquired at different degrees. So if I am a philosopher and very wise and the Socrates and I'm unhappy, chances are the things that are making me unhappy are extremely valuable measures of behavior or morality and so forth. Whereas if I'm as happy as a pig, that all I have to do is to have my belly full with food and probably living in dirt to make me happy. So do I want to be a happy pig, or do I want to be an unhappy Socrates? And therefore, this is the level that he is talking about. Now, it is not only the agent's happiness, it's not the happiness of only my happiness, but happiness of the greatest number of people. And of course, we have to be also, sometimes we raise issues like when the whole Parliament of Athens voted for the death of Socrates. It was a majority. It made the majority of the people happy. But was it a right act? Was it the correct act? And in another place, Mill talks about what about this majority if it becomes eventually the tyranny of the majority? Sometimes not all majorities. If today most of the students in the class vote and decide to throw the teacher out of the window, and it would make them very happy. Okay, so is this a moral act, knowing that it makes a great amount of people happy, but is it in itself a moral act? It is an immoral act. So we have to be very careful about how we approach these teleological aspects. But he believes that if we think of actions that are in the interest of the majority of the people and who become happy, it is when everybody is happy, when you are living in a healthy society, you also benefit. And we look nowadays with this coronavirus, it is a sick society, it is a sick world. And whether we are at home or whether we are outside, we are all in a way vulnerable. We are at risk. So we are much better off living in a healthy world rather than living in an unhealthy world. So things that promote a larger amount of happiness, basically like Adam Smith's invisible hand, will eventually brush back on us. Now, also he says, how do we usually measure happiness? Most of the people think about actions, good or bad, insofar as they are promoting pleasure and reducing pain. However, sometimes we find that there is a lot of happiness in actions that, or there is a lot of suffering eventually in actions that promote happiness. If you look, for example, at Dante's 7 sins, you find that probably the person who committed them at that time, at the particular moment, was very happy, whether it was excessive food or excessive lust or excessive sex or excessive pride, but these were also causing suffering. And then Mill also talks about tranquility and excitement. If you had all the time vacation, you would start yearning for going back to work. If you are all the time working, you would look forward to a vacation. So these ups and downs are very important. And he also talks about, in this utilitarianism, about that these things usually have to be taught. We have to cultivate the mind. The more a person is culturally advanced, the more you educate yourself, the higher are your needs that cause you satisfaction. And therefore, we find that nowadays, and I always say, if you had a chance to make a list of 3 wishes that you would like to have till the end of this year, and you compare them next year to these 3 wishes, you find that they have changed, because people all the time are motivated by different aspects of things that lead to happiness. Now, at the same time, he analyzes what are the greatest causes of evil in this world. In other words, if the aim of person is to avoid suffering and attain pleasure and happiness, then where are the sources of our unhappiness? And he says one of the largest or greatest amount of unhappiness is caused by poverty. Once poverty is eradicated in this world, we will find that lots of people will already rise in their levels of happiness. Also diseases. We find that, as we see today, the virus, no matter how great you are, no matter how important you are, no matter how wealthy you are, if you are sick, then, and there's nothing you can do about it, all the rest just, fades away in your life. Misfortunes and disappointments in this world are a cause of unhappiness, imprudence. You walk on the street and you fall into a hole, you don't see these things, ill-regulated desires, bad social institutions, wars. All of these are eventually conquerable by human beings if they work on them, if they really work on solving these problems. Now, with Kant, we took 4 examples, and when we studied these 4 examples, we analyzed whether they were morally correct based on the 2 maxims that he proposed. Kant proposed the act in such a way as you want your action to be a universal law of nature, and the second one was the law of humanity. And of course, all actions are prompted by the categorical imperative with a sense of a priori duty. He criticized this, and he says, not all actions are yes, there's a sense of duty, but that duty is also acquired. It's not innate. Conscience is an acquired, and when we go and read Freud and the superego next semester, we'll see how much the superego is a regulatory method of policing us and what we are doing. So the object of being virtuous is to be happy. But what is the source of its obligation? What are the sanctions? Why do I act in the way I am acting? So for him, there are always external and internal motives. The external is, for instance, if I ask you the usual question, is cheating good? You will tell me, is anybody proctoring the exam? Will I be alone? Or is God watching? Is Big Brother watching? Are the intelligence services tapping my phone? In other words, am I good because of external forces, because of the policing that is done from outside? Do I stop at the traffic light because there's a policeman? Do I pay my taxes because, in other words, because of the sanctions imposed on me if I fail to do that? And the second one is, there's an internal one, conscience. The inner alarm clock that no matter what happens, no matter where am I, what am I doing, there are certain things I will never do, because that is the way I have been, my cultural mind has developed. So morality is a conscientious feelings for all mankind. And if we all are conscientious and we all follow our internal and external police, then we are all good people. However, what's the difference between Kant and Mill? Mill thought that we are behaving in the proper way because of external reasons, because of practice, because of experience. Because this happened before and I suffered, I will not repeat it. Because somebody else told me that this action is not a good behavior, I will not repeat it. So actions are prompted by their posteriori and not a priori analysis. So what we're going to do in this utilitarian week is we will take the same 4 examples of Kant and ask the same questions as Mill would do with the same Mill's standards. If a man considers to commit suicide and yet has enough conscience to think about it, whether it's a good or bad act, as Kant said, what are the ways that Mill will address this? If a person has a talent and yet doesn't want to share, if a person wants to make a promise and knows that he will never pay back, is that good or bad? And finally, if I see other people involved in problems and I refrain from interfering, is that morally good or bad? There are many ethical examples that we can use when we study utilitarianism. and we can apply both levels of standardizing and measuring, the intuitive or the deontological or the a priori, or the deductive, the empirical, the posteriori, the teleological, the Kant way or the Mill way. Thank you.